He was a billionaire, a man the world admired. Sharp suits, polished cars, and his name etched into skyscrapers. Yet beneath all that power, he carried a secret he thought he had buried years ago. One rainy night, as his chauffeur pulled over, on a dim city street he caught sight of a face he never imagined he'd see again. His heart stopped. It was her, the woman who once held his soul, now broken, shivering and homeless on the sidewalk. But what he didn't know was that this encounter would unravel everything he believed about himself, his past, and the world he controlled. Before he was known as one of the most powerful men in the city, Nathaniel Carter was just a young dreamer, with nothing but ambition in his heart. Born into poverty, he clawed his way through endless obstacles, late nights studying under dim streetlights, countless job rejections, and a society that never truly believed someone like him could belong in boardrooms or atop skyscrapers. But Nathaniel was relentless. He built his empire brick by brick, investment by investment, until his name became synonymous with wealth and influence. On the surface, he had everything: estates sprawling across continents, charities that bore his name, and photographs in glossy magazines that painted him as a symbol of success. Yet behind the carefully curated image lay an emptiness that money could not fill. Years ago, before the headlines, before the empire, there had been a woman who believed in him when no one else did. Her name was Maya. She had been his anchor, his confidant, his first true love. But as Nathaniel climbed higher, society's whispers and unspoken prejudices grew louder. Maya, with her warm smile and proud heritage, was seen by many as a mismatch for a man destined for the upper echelons of power. The pressure to conform weighed heavily on him. In the end, Nathaniel made the choice that haunted him ever since. He let her go, choosing ambition over love, acceptance over authenticity. He told himself it was for the best, that it was the only way to survive in a world built on appearances and privilege. Now, years later, he sat in the back of his limousine, staring out at the rain-slicked streets. And there she was, Maya, reduced to rags and shadows, sitting on the cold concrete, a woman forgotten by the very city she once dreamed of conquering. The sight of Maya lingered in Nathaniel's mind like a ghost refusing to fade. That night, sleep was impossible. He tossed in his penthouse, staring at the city skyline he had once thought would define him. Each glowing tower, each flickering light felt like a reminder of everything he had gained, and everything he had sacrificed. The next morning, Nathaniel instructed his driver to take a detour through the same street. He needed to know it wasn't just a trick of his imagination. And there she was again, huddled near a subway entrance, clutching a thin blanket. Against the biting wind, people walked past her as if she were invisible, their eyes sliding away in practiced indifference. It was then that Nathaniel noticed something more. The stares she did receive were not just dismissive, but harsh, laced with an ugliness he recognized all too well. Whispers followed her not only because she was homeless, but because of the color of her skin. It was the same prejudice that once made Nathaniel question whether the world would accept him at her side. He watched as a group of young men mocked her, tossing coins onto the ground not out of generosity, but cruelty. Each laugh echoed like a blade in his chest. Maya didn't retaliate. She didn't even lift her head. She simply endured, shoulders squared, dignity clinging to her even as the world tried to strip it away. Guilt clawed at Nathaniel. He had resources that could change her life in an instant, yet he remained in the back seat of his luxury car, paralyzed. For years he had convinced himself that walking away from Maya was a necessity, a step toward greatness. But seeing her like this revealed the truth. He hadn't just abandoned her, he had abandoned his own humanity. The following days blurred into an obsession. He returned to that street again and again, each time torn between reaching out and recoiling in shame. He learned fragments of her story from afar. She had lost her job after standing up against workplace discrimination, her voice silenced in a system stacked against her. With no safety net, no one willing to help, she spiraled downward, pushed not only by misfortune, but by a society that seemed determined to punish her for simply existing. Nathaniel began to see the patterns everywhere, discrimination woven into hiring practices, housing policies, even the charities he proudly funded. His wealth had shielded him from much of it, but Maya had faced the full force, and it had broken her. Still, part of him hesitated. What if she rejected his help? What if she despised him for the choices he had made? He carried the weight of his silence, his complicity, and feared it was far too late for redemption. But as each day passed, the image of Maya's tired eyes haunted him. Finally, on a cold evening when the city was alive with holiday lights, Nathaniel made his decision. He stepped out of his limousine, the first time in years he had truly felt the sting of the winter air. As he walked toward her, his heart pounded. The billionaire who had stood unshaken before investors and politicians now trembled before the woman who once held his heart. What he was about to do would not only alter Maya's life, it would force him to confront every compromise, every injustice, every shadow of his past. The city square was bustling, alive with the glow of holiday lights and the chatter of strangers. Yet Nathaniel's world narrowed to a single figure, sitting quietly against the stone wall, as if she were an island forgotten in the tide of humanity. Maya. He approached slowly, his footsteps crunching against the frost. For a moment she didn't even look up. Only when his shadow fell over her did her eyes lift, and recognition struck like lightning. Time seemed to fracture. Her gaze hardened, and though her body was frail, her pride was unbroken. Nathaniel's throat tightened. This was the woman who once believed in his dreams when no one else did. And here she was, discarded while he stood cloaked in luxury. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to pour out years of regret, but the words tangled in his chest. Around them, people began to notice. Some sneered at Maya's presence, their expressions twisted with disdain. One passerby muttered a slur under their breath. Another tossed a crumpled bill at her feet, as though mocking her suffering. The injustice was sharp, public, and undeniable. And something inside Nathaniel snapped. For decades, he had built walls around himself, protecting his image, conforming to society's expectations. But in that instant, he no longer cared about appearances. He reached down, extended his hand, and lifted Maya from the cold ground. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the billionaire who graced magazine covers embraced a woman they had dismissed as nothing. In that moment, the balance shifted. Nathaniel no longer hid from the truth of who she was, or who he had once been, with her. He pulled off his designer coat, wrapping it around her shoulders. Cameras flashed, phones recorded. The same city that had ignored her suffering now bore witness to her dignity being restored, if only symbolically. For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt alive, not as a billionaire, but as a man reclaiming the part of himself he had buried, under ambition and fear. His decision in that square was more than an act of kindness. It was defiance against the prejudice that had once controlled him, and a vow to rewrite both of their stories. The days that followed transformed into headlines across the city. Billionaire rescues homeless woman. The media spun it into a spectacle, yet for Nathaniel, it wasn't about publicity. It was about truth, accountability, and redemption. Maya was taken to a private clinic where her health was restored, but the scars of betrayal and hardship ran deeper than any doctor could heal. Nathaniel visited often, not as a savior, but as a man finally facing the consequences of his choices. He listened as she recounted the years after he left, her career cut short by discrimination, her savings drained when no one would give her a chance, and her quiet descent into the margins of society. Each word was a mirror held up to Nathaniel's own cowardice. But healing began slowly. With his resources, Nathaniel ensured Maya had a home, security, and dignity once more. Yet it was not charity. He saw it as restitution, a step toward righting the wrongs not only he committed, but the world had inflicted on her. Together, they created a foundation dedicated to fighting homelessness and racial injustice, turning personal pain into a force for collective change. Still, Nathaniel knew forgiveness was not guaranteed. Trust could not be rebuilt overnight. But in the silence between them, in the moments when Maya's guarded eyes softened ever so slightly, he felt a glimmer of hope. And as their story spread, it forced others to confront uncomfortable truths. People who once walked past Maya with indifference now saw the injustice they had ignored. Questions began to ripple across the city. How many others were out there, unseen, dismissed, discarded, not because of who they were, but because of the color of their skin? For Nathaniel, the answer was clear: too many. And while he couldn't rewrite the past, he could shape the future. In the end, this wasn't just a story of wealth or ruin, of love lost and found. It was a reminder that the measure of a person's success isn't the skyscrapers they build, but the humanity they choose to protect. And so, as you hear this tale, ask yourself, if you walked past Maya on that street, would you have seen her or looked away?